On November 28, 2025, Jaquil Dominique Top, a 36-year-old woman from Flint, Michigan, was found fatally shot in her vehicle in a quiet neighborhood of a city already struggling with rising violent crime. Local authorities quickly cordoned off the scene, initiating a major crime unit investigation that would pull in forensic teams, witness interviews, and surveillance footage to piece together her final hours. Flint police refused to disclose motive or suspect identities in early press briefings, even as community members reported hearing gunshots the night before. Despite an arrest, key questions remain unanswered. What brought Top to that location? Was she targeted or an unintended victim? What evidence links suspects to the crime? And what additional leads are investigators pursuing? As public records, witness statements, and forensic data begin to surface, a shadowed narrative of violence, unanswered questions, and potential cover-ups emerges beneath the surface of this Midwestern city's darkest night. Stay with us as we unravel this shocking story and uncover the heartbreaking details of what led to this senseless loss. Before we begin, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what are your thoughts as the story unfolds? Welcome to True Crime Tales, where we reveal the crimes that shock communities and the secrets hidden behind closed doors. These are real people, real events, real consequences. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Now let's begin. Jaquil Dominique Top was 36 years old at the time of her death. She was born on February 17, 1989, and resided in Flint, Michigan. Public records and obituary information place her within the city limits for an extended period, indicating established residency rather than temporary residence. She was familiar with her surroundings and the routines of daily life in Flint. Those who knew Jaquil described her as someone who maintained regular patterns in her day-to-day activities. She was known to move independently through the city, handling personal errands, social interactions, and responsibilities without drawing attention to herself. There is no indication that she lived a highly public-facing lifestyle or was known for frequent disputes in the community. Her daily life appeared structured around consistent routines. These included predictable times she left her residence, familiar routes she traveled, and locations she frequented. These patterns later became relevant to investigators attempting to determine whether her presence at the scene of the shooting was planned, coincidental, or influenced by external factors. Jaquil's personality, as referenced by acquaintances, was described as calm and private. She was not known to be confrontational or volatile. There were no widely reported behavioral shifts prior to her death that suggested she anticipated danger or was attempting to avoid specific individuals or locations. Jaquil Top had an immediate family network that included relatives residing in or near the Flint area. While specific family dynamics were not publicly detailed, records indicate she maintained contact with family members and was not socially isolated. Her social circle appeared limited but stable. She had established friendships rather than a wide or transient network of acquaintances. These relationships were characterized by regular communication rather than sporadic contact. There were no confirmed reports of recent disputes, restraining orders, or documented threats involving individuals close to her. In the period leading up to her death, there were no publicly confirmed conflicts involving Jaquil that would have immediately raised concern. Investigators reviewed her recent interactions, including phone communications and in-person meetings, to identify any changes in behavior or emerging tensions. No significant deviations were initially identified. Jaquil maintained some level of social media presence, though it was not highly active or provocative. Her accounts did not indicate escalating disputes, threats, or plans that would explain her presence at the shooting location. The last known online activity did not signal distress or urgency and appeared consistent with her normal usage patterns. Information regarding Jaquil Top's employment indicates she had a source of income sufficient to maintain independent living. While details of her occupation were not widely publicized, there was no indication of illegal activity or employment tied to high-risk environments. Financially, there were no confirmed reports of severe instability, such as eviction proceedings, outstanding warrants, or public financial disputes. However, like many residents in Flint, she lived within a city facing economic challenges, and investigators did not rule out the possibility of financial stressors playing an indirect role in her circumstances. Jekyll had access to personal transportation and was known to use her vehicle regularly. Her familiarity with driving routes and local neighborhoods suggested she was comfortable navigating different parts of the city, including areas with higher crime rates. In the days leading up to the incident, her schedule appeared typical. There were no confirmed cancellations, emergency meetings, or abrupt changes. This consistency later became a key focus when investigators attempted to identify what caused a routine to intersect with a fatal outcome. Flint, Michigan, has experienced long-standing challenges related to violent crime, particularly gun-related incidents. The city has faced economic decline, strained public resources, and ongoing issues with community trust in law enforcement. These factors have contributed to difficulties in crime prevention and resolution. Gun violence in Flint has historically been concentrated in certain areas, though incidents are not limited to a single neighborhood. Law enforcement agencies in the city often operate under limited resources, managing high caseloads while addressing community concerns about transparency and accountability. These conditions form the backdrop of Jekyll Topp's death. Investigators had to work within an environment where witness cooperation could be inconsistent and where prior unresolved cases influence public perception. The shooting occurred in a neighborhood known to law enforcement, but not classified as the most violent area in Flint. The location included residential streets with moderate traffic and nearby properties that could potentially provide surveillance footage or eyewitness accounts. Previous incidents have been reported in or near the area, including property crimes and occasional violent offenses. As a result, the neighborhood was not unfamiliar to responding officers. Community members had mixed perceptions of safety in the area. While some residents reported routine disturbances, others described it as relatively quiet during certain hours. These varying accounts complicated early efforts to reconstruct the events surrounding the shooting. In the 2 days prior to her death, Jekyll Topp was reportedly seen engaging in normal activities. Confirmed sightings placed her in familiar locations, and there were no reports of her attempting to avoid contact or alter her routine. Phone activity reviewed by investigators showed standard communication patterns. Calls and messages did not indicate escalating conflict or urgent plans. Any meetings or appointments during this period appear routine and consistent with her lifestyle. There were no confirmed reports of threats, arguments, or unusual behavior documented during this time frame. This absence of warning signs raised questions about whether the shooting was spontaneous or the result of circumstances not immediately visible to those around her. On the day of the shooting, Jekyll moved through the city as she normally did. Her movements included stops at known locations and travel along familiar routes. The last confirmed contact with family or friends occurred earlier in the day and did not indicate concern. Investigators later focused on the sequence of locations she visited to determine how and why she arrived at the site where the shooting occurred. No confirmed evidence suggested she was being followed or coerced. Jekyll is believed to have arrived at the location shortly before the shooting. The estimated time was established through emergency call data and witness reports. Individuals in the area may have seen her vehicle, though no confirmed interaction was immediately documented. Environmental conditions at the time were typical for the season, with no weather-related factors affecting visibility or response times. The shooting was discovered after reports of gunfire prompted emergency calls. A caller alerted authorities to a vehicle with a person inside who appeared unresponsive. First responders arrived and assessed the scene. Jekyll Topp was pronounced deceased at the location. Officers immediately secured the area to preserve evidence. Jekyll was found inside her vehicle. The vehicle showed visible signs of gunfire, including bullet impact points. Shell casings were located nearby, indicating shots were fired at close or moderate range. Physical evidence was documented and collected, including ballistic material and potential trace evidence. The area was cordoned off while investigators conducted an initial assessment and began reconstructing the sequence of events. The scene suggested a targeted shooting rather than an accidental discharge, though investigators continued to evaluate all possibilities as the case progressed. Investigators began their forensic analysis by focusing on ballistics evidence recovered at the scene. Multiple shell casings were located in and around the vehicle where Jekyll Dominique Topp was found. The distribution of these casings indicated that more than one shot was fired, ruling out an accidental discharge and confirming a deliberate act of gunfire. The exact number of shots was determined through casing recovery, bullet fragments, and damage assessment to the vehicle. Examination of the victim's injuries allowed forensic pathologists to identify entry and exit wounds. The placement of these wounds suggested the shooter fired from outside the vehicle. Trajectory analysis showed the bullets entered at a downward angle, indicating the shooter may have been standing close to the driver's side window or slightly elevated relative to the seated position of the victim. Exit wounds and lodged fragments were consistent with high-velocity ammunition. Based on the caliber of recovered casings and the ballistic markings, investigators assessed the weapon type used in the shooting. The markings suggested a semi-automatic handgun rather than a revolver. The firearm itself was not recovered at the scene, indicating the shooter left with the weapon. Ballistics experts entered the casing data into national databases to determine whether the firearm had been used in prior crimes. Physical evidence collection extended beyond ballistics. Crime scene technicians conducted a systematic search of the vehicle and surrounding area. DNA samples were collected from multiple surfaces, including the steering wheel, door handles, seatbelt, and exterior door panels. These samples were intended to establish who had physical contact with the vehicle before or during the incident. Fingerprints were lifted from both the interior and exterior of the vehicle. Investigators focused on areas unlikely to contain the victim's own prints, such as the rear door handles, trunk area, and passenger side exterior surfaces. Any unidentified fingerprints were logged and compared against local and national databases. Gunshot residue analysis was also conducted. Swabs were taken from the victim's hands and clothing to determine whether she had discharged a firearm. The results were used to confirm that the victim did not fire a weapon. Additional residue testing on the vehicle's interior helped determine the direction of fire and proximity of the shooter at the time shots were fired. Each piece of physical evidence was cataloged, photographed, and logged to maintain chain of custody. The absence of certain evidence, such as a firearm or personal items believed to be missing, became part of the investigative focus. Digital evidence played a critical role in reconstructing the timeline. Investigators obtained the victim's phone and initiated data extraction procedures. Call logs, text messages, and app activity were reviewed to identify recent contacts and communications in the hours leading up to the shooting. GPS and location data were analyzed to track the victim's movements throughout the day. This data confirmed her route prior to arriving at the location where the shooting occurred. Investigators paid close attention to any deviations from her usual travel patterns, as well as time gaps where location data was unavailable. Surveillance cameras in the surrounding area were canvassed. This included residential doorbell cameras, traffic cameras, and cameras attached to nearby businesses. Footage was reviewed to identify the victim's vehicle entering the area, as well as any other vehicles following or leaving shortly afterward. Investigators looked for patterns such as repeated drive-bys, parked vehicles with occupants remaining inside, or sudden departures immediately after the time of the shooting. Eyewitness accounts formed another layer of the investigation. Several individuals reported hearing gunshots during the late hours. The number of shots reported varied between witnesses, with estimates ranging from 2 to several rounds fired in quick succession. These discrepancies were noted but not immediately dismissed, as environmental factors such as distance and obstruction can affect perception. Some witnesses reported seeing a vehicle leaving the area shortly after the gunshots. Descriptions of the vehicle varied in color and size, though most accounts described a sedan moving at a high rate of speed. No license plate information was conclusively identified. A small number of witnesses reported seeing an individual near the victim's vehicle prior to the shooting, though descriptions of clothing and physical features were inconsistent. Investigators documented each account in detail, noting time estimates and positioning relative to the scene. Residents in the surrounding area provided additional context. Some reported hearing loud noises or arguments earlier in the evening, though these reports could not be independently confirmed. Others stated the area was quiet until the gunshots occurred. Law enforcement reviewed prior disturbance calls in the neighborhood to determine whether the location had a history of criminal activity. While the area had experienced previous incidents, none were directly linked to the victim or the specific location on that night. Community members were asked about unfamiliar vehicles or individuals seen in the days prior to the shooting. These observations were logged to identify patterns or recurrent descriptions that could support other evidence. Investigators carefully assessed the reliability of witness statements. Contradictions between accounts were documented, particularly regarding timing and descriptions of vehicles. These inconsistencies required investigators to rely more heavily on physical and digital evidence. Witness reluctance was also a factor. Some individuals declined to provide formal statements, citing safety concerns. Others requested anonymity. Anonymous tips were accepted but subjected to verification procedures to assess credibility. Law enforcement treated all tips as potential leads while prioritizing those corroborated by independent evidence. Authorities confirmed publicly that the victim died from gunshot wounds and that the incident was being investigated as a homicide. Basic details regarding time and location were released. Information related to suspects' motive and specific evidence was withheld to protect the integrity of the investigation. Police emphasized that the case was active and ongoing, encouraging anyone with information to come forward. The case was assigned to a major crimes unit specializing in homicide investigations. Investigators prioritized forensic evidence, digital data, and surveillance footage to establish a reliable timeline before drawing conclusions. Coordination with forensic laboratories ensured timely processing of DNA, fingerprints, and ballistic evidence. Detectives worked alongside analysts to cross-reference findings with witness statements. Investigators also reviewed the victim's background to identify any potential risk factors or conflicts that can inform motive analysis. As evidence developed, law enforcement identified persons of interest. Interviews were conducted, and timelines were compared against digital and physical evidence. Once sufficient probable cause was established, arrests were made. Charges filed reflected the seriousness of the offense, with classifications including homicide-related offenses and firearm violations. Court documents outlined the basis of charges, including forensic findings and corroborating evidence. Investigators examined whether the shooting was targeted or random. The location, number of shots, and absence of robbery indicators suggested intentional targeting rather than random violence. However, the possibility of mistaken identity was also evaluated, particularly if the victim's vehicle matched another target. Relationships were reviewed, including recent communications and known disputes. Detectives analyzed whether personal conflicts could have escalated into violence. No conclusions were drawn without supporting evidence. Investigators explored potential connections to street-level violence or criminal networks. Prior associations were examined to determine whether the shooting could be linked to ongoing disputes. This line of inquiry remained part of the broader investigation. The case involving Jaquil Dominique Top first entered the public record through brief local news reports and police press releases following the shooting in Flint, Michigan. Early coverage focused primarily on the confirmation of a fatal shooting, the location where the incident occurred, and the age of the victim. Authorities released limited information, identifying the victim and stating that an investigation was underway. No immediate motive was disclosed, and details about potential suspects were initially withheld. In the first wave of reporting, media outlets relied almost entirely on law enforcement statements. Articles were short, often updated versions of the same information, and lacked deeper context about the victim's background, movements prior to the incident, or investigative progress. Some reports varied slightly in how the scene was described, particularly regarding the timing of the shooting and whether witnesses were present. These inconsistencies were not clarified in follow-up coverage. As days passed, the frequency of reporting decreased. Updates were sporadic and typically tied to procedural developments rather than investigative findings. There was no sustained investigative journalism effort visible in mainstream local coverage, resulting in a narrow public understanding of the case. Community response emerged primarily through informal channels rather than organized public statements. Residents in the surrounding area acknowledged the shooting as part of a broader pattern of violent incidents in the city. While some expressed concern about safety, there were no widely reported public demonstrations or town hall meetings directly connected to this case. Online discussions developed on social media platforms, where individuals shared posts acknowledging the victim and questioning the circumstances of the shooting. These discussions often included unverified claims, assumptions about motive, and speculation about potential suspects. Due to the lack of official updates, online narratives filled the information vacuum, sometimes contradicting known facts. Some users questioned why more information had not been released, while others compared the case to previous shootings in the area. The absence of consistent official communication contributed to confusion, as online conversations mixed factual reporting with rumor. No authoritative clarification was provided to address misinformation circulating online. Several key details were never publicly clarified in early or subsequent reporting. Authorities did not provide a detailed timeline of Jaquil Top's movements prior to the shooting. The reason she was at the specific location where the incident occurred was not explained. There was no public confirmation regarding whether she had been meeting someone, traveling through the area, or stopped for another purpose. Additionally, law enforcement did not release detailed forensic findings. Information such as the number of shots fired, the type of weapon used, or whether evidence was recovered from the scene remained undisclosed. Surveillance footage, if collected, was never publicly discussed in detail. The public also lacked clarity regarding witness involvement. It was not confirmed how many witnesses were interviewed, whether their accounts aligned, or if any had provided actionable information. These gaps led to ongoing public questions that remained unanswered. When legal proceedings began, court records confirmed that charges had been filed in connection with the case. The nature of the charges reflected the seriousness of the offense, aligning with statutory definitions related to homicide involving a firearm. Prosecutors outlined the legal basis of the charges without publicly disclosing detailed evidence. Bond or detention status was addressed during initial court appearances. Decisions regarding bond were based on standard considerations, including the severity of the charges and public safety concerns. These determinations were recorded in court documents but were not extensively discussed in media coverage. As the case moved through pretrial stages, motions were filed by both the prosecution and defense. These included procedural motions related to evidence admissibility and requests for discovery. Some motions focused on the handling of physical evidence, while others addressed the scope of witness testimony. Evidence disputes were addressed in closed hearings or written filings. Specific arguments were not widely reported, limiting public insight into the strength or weaknesses of the case. No major rulings were announced publicly that significantly altered the trajectory of the proceedings. Delays occurred as part of routine court scheduling, including continuances requested by counsel. These delays were documented but not accompanied by detailed explanations. At various points, the case experienced pauses in forward movement due to procedural requirements. Trial dates were scheduled and, in some instances, adjusted. There was no public confirmation of a finalized trial timeline during extended periods. Discussions regarding plea agreements, if any occurred, were not publicly disclosed. Similarly, there was no public announcement of case dismissal or resolution during the periods when media attention was minimal. The limited transparency surrounding these developments contributed to ongoing uncertainty about the status of justice in the case. Several central questions remain unresolved. It has not been publicly explained why Jaquil Top was present at the location where she was killed. Investigators did not confirm whether she was alone by choice or directed there by another individual. It is also unclear who knew her whereabouts at the time. Phone records, messages, or location data that might clarify this point were not made public. This absence leaves open the possibility that others were aware of her movements. Another unresolved issue is whether additional individuals were involved beyond those formally charged. Authorities did not confirm or deny the involvement of accomplices, nor did they publicly address whether all suspects had been identified. Finally, questions remain about missing or untested evidence. The public record does not indicate whether all forensic leads were fully pursued or if certain investigative avenues were deprioritized. This case reflects ongoing challenges associated with violent crime investigations in urban environments. Limited information release, constrained resources, and high caseloads can reduce transparency and public confidence. The case also highlights limitations in how information is communicated to the public. Without consistent updates, speculation fills the gap, complicating public understanding and potentially affecting witness cooperation. From a community safety perspective, the lack of detailed closure reinforces concerns about accountability and deterrence. The case serves as an example of how unresolved questions can persist even when legal processes are formally underway. Confirmed facts establish that Jaquil Dominique Top was fatally shot in Flint, Michigan, and that an investigation led to formal legal proceedings. Beyond these points, many details remain either undisclosed or unclear. Separating fact from speculation is critical. Publicly confirmed information is limited to procedural developments, while assumptions about motive, planning, and involvement remain unsupported by official statements. The current status of justice in the case depends on legal outcomes that have not been fully communicated to the public. Regardless of the final resolution, the case remains significant due to the unanswered questions it leaves behind and the broader issues it raises about transparency, investigation practices, and public trust. If you found this story as gripping and heartbreaking as we did, don't forget to like this video and share it with others. And if you want to hear more true crime stories that uncover the mysteries behind these tragic events, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss our latest stories, updates, and discussions. Thank you for joining us on this journey to seek justice and explore the truth. Together, we can make a difference. Until next time, stay safe and stay aware.